Each season, Bournemouth attracts thousands of holiday makers. For over 30 years it was home to a delightful tramway. And later to one of the finest trolleybus systems in the country. Using a few photographs and a wide selection of vintage cine film, some of which is included for rarity value, this video has been specially assembled to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Bournemouth Transport. In later years, most filmmakers headed straight for the legendary turntable, squeezed into the yard of the Dolphin pub at Christchurch. This became arguably the most photographed trolleybus installation in the world. However, for over 65 years it was the square which was at the operational heart of the town's trams and trolleybuses. It was here that the town's first electric trams had opened for traffic on the 23rd of July 1902. As the system expanded, some sections employed the conduit method of current collection, but these sections proved too expensive and were replaced by the more conventional overhead wires in 1911. Interestingly, the first electric trams had started running in neighbouring Poole in April 1901. Like Bournemouth, the company-owned system was built to the narrow 3-foot 6-inch gauge. In June 1905, Bournemouth Corporation acquired the company and all its assets. Then, as a result, a through Poole Christchurch service was established. This 11-mile route crossed a purpose-built toll bridge at Tuckton. The Bournemouth fleet included just one single-decker. Like the first 57 double-deckers, it was built by G.F. Milnes. 28 of the double-deckers were mounted on Peckham four-wheel trucks. The remainder on Brill 22E bogies. In 1905, the Poole Company fleet of 17 four-wheelers passed to the corporation. Then, over a 20-year period, the corporation purchased some 60 bogie cars with a strong family resemblance, the last being delivered in 1926. Closures started with the lower Parkstone line in 1929, and then in 1930 powers were obtained to operate trackless trolleys. To test 4 different types of vehicle, an experimental trolleybus route, shown here in green, began operation on the 13th of May 1933. The line was just over a mile in length. This Wayman-bodied Sunbeam MS2 had one 80-horsepower motor and proved the most successful. This AEC 661T, with a 50-seater English electric motorbus-style body, also had a single 80-horsepower motor. AEC also provided a 3-axle 663T, with a 60-seater English electric body. Thornycroft supplied a brush-bodied single-decker. Nicknamed Bluebird owing to her distinctive livery, she proved a lively performer and could reputedly reach 40 miles an hour. The experiment was an undoubted success and persuaded the corporation to scrap the remaining trams within 3 years. A further 18 Sunbeam MS2s were delivered during 1934. They followed the Bournemouth pattern of having rear-loading front-exit bodies with dual staircases. 12 were built by Park Royal, the remainder by English Electric. Trolleybuses were specially decorated for the official opening of the system and the first extension to Boscombe on the 22nd of June 1934. Included was a spur serving the town's football ground. These 1935 views show some Dean Court specials. One of the 6 English electric-bodied MS2s stands at the end of the Queen's Park spur. When service began up challenging Richmond Hill on the 7th of June 1935, the trolleys were equipped with both coasting and emergency run-back brakes for working on the 1 in 8 grade. The trams disappeared quite swiftly. By the beginning of 1936, only the main road route from the square to Southbourne and Christchurch remained. The growing trolleybus network is shown in white. Owing to the high seasonal demand, most of the tram fleet, except for the ex-pool cars, survived to the end. Even after the trolleybuses replaced the trams, those routes serving Southbourne and Christchurch continued to be known as the main road, everything else being lumped together as the side routes. Two bogie cars, 122 dated from 1926 and 54 from 1904. Bournemouth never operated any top-covered trams. This sequence was filmed on an inbound journey from Lansdowne to the square. Route boards were displayed on the upper deck railings. For short workings, the outer boards would simply be covered over. Horseshoe Common was where the inbound and outbound tracks diverged, a practice later continued by the trolleybuses. Overlooked by St. Peter's Church, 96 winds down the hill to pass the famous Bournemouth Arcade. Fascinating line of charabancs plying for trade in Jarvis Place. Passing Plumber's Department Store on the right. At this time, the centre of the square was occupied by the tramway's waiting room, with its distinctive clock tower. The car in front is running forward to reverse prior to starting the run back to Christchurch. Overlooked by bobbies, passengers would pour off the trams heading for the shops, the pleasure gardens, the beach and places of entertainment. Amazing colour. Taken over 67 years ago, this shows Hanson Dorset buses, trams and trolleybuses at the square and the Lansdowne. The Metropole Hotel in the background would be destroyed during the war. With due ceremony, the last tram would bow out on April the 8th, 1936. Note the covered-over route board on the left. After closure, 10 passenger cars were sold to the Llandudno and Colwyn Bay Electric Railway, together with ex-pool car number 1, which had survived as a works car. Here they would dip and sway along the North Wales coast for nearly 20 years. The only 1914 built car to go became Llandudno number 6. The rest, 7 to 15, were post-war brush-built cars. This was the veteran ex-pool works car of 1901. When the Llandudno system finally closed on the 25th of March 1956, one of the Bournemouths, number 8, would perform the last rites. Fortunately, number 6 was set aside for preservation. Today, beautifully restored into its Bournemouth colours, 85 is now on display at the Museum of Electricity in Christchurch. Another tram which should have been preserved was single-decker number 1. This had amazingly survived as a shelter at Iford Terminus until 1961. 84 MS2s were delivered during 1935-6. Note the side destination boards. What happened to the 4 experimentals? In 1934, the 2 AECs became motorbuses, and in this guise kept working until 1950. The prototype Sunbeam was reconstructed in 1936 with a front exit and staircase, plus a revised front indicator display. In the same year, Bluebird reappeared in the standard primrose and maroon livery. In 1942, it was sold to South Shields, where she remained in service until 1950. 152 was splendidly decorated with over 1,200 lamps for the 1937 coronation. In September 1939, there were 104 trolleys working over 33 1/3 route miles on 16 services. Following the outbreak of war, riding levels dropped dramatically, thus allowing the corporation to hire out its surplus vehicles. 12, complete with Bournemouth crews, went to Wolverhampton in 1940, where they were nicknamed Sunshine Trolleys. Due to their braking system, the 18 dispatched to Ilford in East London became known as the Yellow Perils. After release by London Transport, some came home, whilst others spent time under the wires at Newcastle, Llanelli, South Shields and Walsall, seen here. All these were back by August 1945. When vehicles like 105 returned from Wolverhampton after 6 years, they looked shabby and neglected. This view clearly shows the chocolate-coloured roof, introduced during the war as a camouflage measure. Also the separate service number box added in 1938. After being overhauled and repainted, all the exiles joined their sister vehicles as holidaymakers once again flocked to the beaches, anxious to escape post-war deprivations. The dual door arrangement, which certainly reduced loading and offloading time, did mean fewer seats. This was especially noticeable on Richmond Hill, where standing was not permitted. This petrol-driven Leyland TD5 dated from 1939. Like the trolleybuses, it had an open rear platform, front doors, and front and rear staircases. All this batch were later fitted with diesel engines, with half a dozen becoming open toppers. This was one of a small group of Bedford utility vehicles introduced during the war. In the spring of 1947, the square was rebuilt to include a large traffic island. Note the site of Woolworths damaged during the bombing. The chocolate-coloured roofs dated from 1939. The reconstruction involved demolition of the former tramway waiting room. The trolleybus wiring was also considerably altered, with the provision of additional loops in Jarvis Place. The side routes, those using Richmond Hill, were also extended to the triangle, with the main outbound loading points being resited in Avenue Road. Views on the single wiring along Bath Road taken prior to the opening of the extension to the pier. Inbound trolleybuses passing through Lansdowne could reach the square either via the old Christchurch Road or Bath Road and Westover Road, seen here. Trolleybuses would finally reach the pier at Easter 1950. Taken some 20 years earlier is film of 3 of the Ducros single-deckers delivered in the late 1920s. A rare view of a 3-axle carrier with Hall-Lewis body. The pier always acted as a magnet for holidaymakers. In its heyday, it had been a bracing place to watch the many paddle steamers taking people on local excursions as well as longer sailings to Weymouth and the Isle of Wight. The much-loved Bournemouth Queen lasted from 1908 to 1957. Another red funnel favourite was Princess Elizabeth of 1927. She is now preserved at Dunkirk. Another post-war regular was Embassy. She spent 30 years as part of the fleet owned by Cousins of Weymouth. Matapan, a former Class B Fairmile launch, was converted in 1948 to carry 250 passengers, and she survived until 1976. Another source of interest for traction enthusiasts was the East Cliff Lift. Back now to the trolleybuses. To handle growing traffic and work various new extensions, 24 Wayman-bodied BUTs entered service between October 1950 and January 1951. These luxurious 56-seaters proved too heavy in weight at over 10 tons and heavy in current consumption. They had powerful 120 horsepower motors. On the brand new wiring at the pier. On the one-way terminal loop at Westbourne. Problems at Lansdowne. Note the remains of the Metropole Hotel in the background. Some 18 MS2s now went for scrap, but another 16, including number 96, would be reconditioned. Manager Reeks, appointed in 1948, was pro-trolleybus and envisaged a number of post-war extensions. However, the line along Castle Lane East, shown in green, opened in October 1951, proved to be the last. They were worked initially by 2 circular routes. A loop was built halfway along Castle Lane East at Screwden Park in May 1953. Here the trolleys picked their way through the gorse bushes on an unmade surface. Front and rear destination displays now became standardized. The bottom auxiliary blind indicated which inbound wiring was to be followed between Lansdowne and the square. On the 23rd of July 1953, the corporation proudly opened their £500,000 new depot. Destination blind showed Castle Lane, but the legal lettering on the side of the vehicles, Mallard Road. Moordown Depot was now closed, the building itself being demolished in 1984. Also disappearing were the old-style bell punch tickets, phased out by March 1954. In their place, far more Spartan ultimates. March 1956 saw the introduction of a new numbering scheme. All the post-war trolleybus extensions are shown in orange. Although the elderly Sunbeams were living on borrowed time, repaints, some including the chocolate roofs, continued until 1955. During the next 2 years, more MS2s would go for scrap, whilst others like 142 and 166 were placed in store, but never ran again. Some scenes taken in 1957, prior to a trolleybus tour organised by the Southern Counties Touring Society. Here BUT 204 leaves Central Depot to travel west along Southcote Road. Two generations at Seymour Road, Westbourne, western terminus of the 25. The Stroughton Park Loop, much loved by photographers, would disappear in December 1962. On reaching Mallard Road, a switch was made to one of the dwindling band of MS2s. Some of the participants may well have ridden on this same vehicle in Ilford and Newcastle. Within 18 months, 145 would be broken up. No tour was complete without a visit to the famous turntable. Turning again, this time on the circle at Carberry Avenue. Another Bournemouth feature was the pride of place given to the coat of arms. These years were particularly significant. The existing trolleybuses were renumbered, 30 new ones were delivered, 7 were acquired from Brighton, and 3 veterans lost their top decks. Knowing people will always love an open ride, especially in warm weather, Bournemouth Corporation had a long history of seafront vehicles or toast-rack motorbuses. The first open-top double-deckers were 4 converted utility Guy Arabs with Wayman bodies, the first of which had appeared in its new guise on the 18th of July 1952. These carried visitors up to Hengistbury Head Double Dykes, site of an ancient British iron trading post. This guy would later be further transformed into an open single-decker, known affectionately as the banana boat. To the delight of enthusiasts, in 1958, 3 MS2s were rebuilt into open toppers. Now numbered 200 to 202, they worked a new circular tour, 39. Sadly, this service never really succeeded. All too frequently, due to staff shortages, trolleybus crews would be switched to work the more popular open-top bus routes, for which 6 pre-war TD5s were converted between 1958 and 1962. The rebuilding work for the open-top trolleys had involved removing the front exit and staircase, thereby raising seating capacity to 69. Prospective punters for the 39 were also said to be nervous in case they were splashed with grease from the trolley wheels. Embassy is at the pier, and one of the tower wagons, converted from buses acquired from Huddersfield, is inspecting the overhead. Bournemouth always had an enviable record for good maintenance. On a 39 ascending the unidirectional wiring on Exeter Road, which led straight from the pier to the square. As part of the 1958 renumbering scheme, the remaining enclosed MS2s became 205 to 233. For example, 99 was renumbered 212. The BUTs became 234 to 257. For example, 204 was renumbered 238. Between August 1958 and November 1959, the corporation took delivery of 258 to 287, 20 new Wayman-bodied Sunbeam MF2Bs. As they were being delivered, a further 10 identical vehicles was ordered. At first, some drivers did have problems with the overhang beyond the front door. The purchase of second-hand BUTs from Brighton caused a political storm, some people dismissing them as cast-offs. The 7 vehicles included 3 from Brighton Corporation and 4 from Brighton Hove and District. Following an extensive facelift, the first 2 were in service in Bournemouth by June 1959. Owing to the absence of a front exit door, the small but fast Brighton Bells were generally confined to peak hour runs on the side routes. In March 1962, Douglas Reeks was succeeded as manager by Ronald Cox. In the previous financial year, the trolleybuses had carried 24 million passengers, and several extensions were still under consideration. Between July and November came 9 new trolleybuses, the 10th chassis having been lost in a fire. These 30-foot-long Sunbeam MF2Bs were the last new trolleys to enter service in Britain. Despite having 39 state-of-the-art trolleybuses, Manager Cox recommended in March 1963 that the network should be phased out over a 15-year period. He advised that further new vehicles would be difficult to buy and that fixed installations meant reduced flexibility, especially when faced with proposed new roadworks. Those arguing for retention highlighted smoothness, acceleration, longevity, and quietness. Not for nothing were the trolleybuses praised as the silent service. To provide additional seating, 10 of the power-hungry six-wheel BUTs were rebuilt during 1962-3. Although retaining their front exits, the front staircases were removed, thereby increasing seating capacity from 56 to 68. This shows 239 without its front staircase. Arrival of the last batch of Sunbeams spelt the end for their more elderly sisters. During the 1963 season, the surviving MS2 still turned up in all-day service. An unusual view of one on the move with an open front door. When the season ended, some, still with their original bodies and chassis, had clocked up 29 years of service, running over 800,000 miles. All went for scrap except 212, formerly 99, which was acquired for preservation. In their heyday, they had formed the largest single group of identical vehicles ever owned by a municipality. Even the three converts were living on borrowed time. The 39 operated for the last time on the 29th of September 1963. During the season there have been 10 advertised departures at an adult fare of 2 shillings. Roadworks forced the closure of 4 routes during the period the 28th to the 30th of September 1963. The wiring shown in orange fell into disuse, although it remained for depot journeys until the 30th of December. The Queen's Park branch, shown in green, remained available for football specials. The in-town terminus of the 34 was the Lansdowne. From here it travelled to Westway and Broadway via St Paul's Road. No footage on this section has come to light. Once the 38 was discontinued on the 23rd of August 1964, the open toppers ceased to have any real employment. Occasionally other classes had also worked the 38. During 1964, the open toppers were only used for enthusiast tours. 201 made one of its last appearances on the 14th of June 1964, covering sections of the system threatened with imminent closure. Here it reverses gingerly out of Folkestone Depot, with the new Bell Inn in the background. Being towed back to Mallard Road by Guy Arab FRU 180. Although all 3 remained in stock after August 1964, only 202 would find occasional employment, again operating for enthusiasts. Both 200 and 201 were scrapped in November 1965, but fortunately 202 would pass into preservation. On the motorbus front, the open-top TD5s bowed out at the end of the 1965 season. Note the delightful battery-operated luggage carrier. For devotees of public transport, the mid-60s were fairly gloomy. Everywhere the growth of television and the increased use of private cars was leading to a severe reduction in the use of public transport, although the Hanson Dorset bus station was still brimming with vehicles. On the railways, the beaching axe was in full swing, and two local area stations, Boscombe and Bournemouth West, were chopped in October 1965. Even the once popular cruise trade was collapsing. Embassy, withdrawn in 1966, was the last paddler to regularly visit the pier. Faced by their own mounting economic problems, the corporation decided in February 1965 to replace the trolleybuses as soon as possible. In the interim, headways were to be reduced, especially on Sundays, and some routes would go without replacement. Among trolleys destined for early withdrawal were the 7 Wayman body Brightons. The 35, which was withdrawn on the 4th of April 1965, ran between the Square and Malvern Road on an hourly headway requiring just one vehicle. An MS2 on Charminster Road. The trolley reverser at Malvern Road terminus. The second major stage of the conversion programme involved replacement of the Crosstown 25, together with closure of the central depot. The Brighton Bells and most of the BUTs were to be withdrawn. This diagram shows the complexity of the layouts around the square and triangle, following improvements introduced in 1960. Bill Biddlecombe, the Deputy Chief Inspector, welcomes enthusiasts to the Central Depot, which would close its doors on the 7th of June 1965. The adjacent power station had closed 10 years earlier, when all electrical current was subsequently supplied from the national grid through 8 substations. Bill Biddlecombe had taught over 1,600 trolleybus drivers during his long career. This trolleybus has left the depot and is approaching Holdenhurst Road. "145 heads for the depot along Southcote Road, part of which supported a section of 3-wire overhead. Brief close-ups of this unique layout, which consisted of 2 negatives either side of a central positive. The internal wiring allowed vehicles to run through the depot building to emerge into St Clement's Road. Now in its 100th year, these former tramway sheds are still used by the corporation's refuse vehicles. The Brighton BUT 9611Ts were all withdrawn between May and August 1965. In peak hours, the 56-seater Bells could be seen leaving the triangle, heading for the loading points along Avenue Road. Years earlier, this had been the site of a fatal tramway runaway. Avenue Road had 3 sidings for the various services using Richmond Hill. This allowed other trolleys to pass on the outside. As a prelude to the main 25 closure, the little-used Queen's Park branch fell into disuse on the 10th of May 1965, although the wiring remained in situ. The trunk 25 was replaced as from the 13th of September 1965. A rebuilt BUT is on the one-way terminal routing at Boscombe. Passing close to Bournemouth Central Station on Holdenhurst Road, these scenes being taken variously between 1957 and 1965. Action around Lansdowne. Along with the Folkestone routes, the 25s had 2 ways of reaching the square. Every other one went via Old Christchurch Road, the lower auxiliary indicator showing Old Christchurch Road in blue and later black. For the other routing, the lower front indicator showed Bath Road and Westover Road in red. This BUT still has its front staircase. Turning near the Royal Bath Hotel. By 1965, the 25 was the only route working across town through the square. The 31, showing to and from tennis on its auxiliary blind, runs in front of a 25. Since 1948, the triangle had served as an off-peak parking area for spare vehicles. Passing Bournemouth West Station. On its heavily used journey of just over 3 miles, the 25 served 3 local stations, West, Central and Boscombe. This was the course of the original experimental route opened in 1933. A rebuilt BUT at the start of the one-way loop at Westbourne. Heading back to town on the 26-minute journey to Boscombe. In peak hours, there would be a 25 passing here every 6 to 7 minutes. Bustling back through the town centre with its spider's web of frogs and crossings. However, in order to speed up movements, the 25s enjoyed a frog-free run across the foot of Richmond Hill since the wiring alterations of 1960. Except for the last few months, Central Depot have provided all duties on the 25. Also from the 13th of September 1965, the 24 to jumpers was reduced to peak hour workings only. A week later, most Sunday schedules were severely curtailed, and the first of the side routes was closed. The peak hour 26 to Moordown Lawford Road was withdrawn altogether. No actual wiring was involved. An earlier scene of a 26 heading north at Cemetery Junction. The Wallisdown through working ceased to exist as from the 16th of April 1966. Although the 30s no longer used the wiring shown in orange, it remained energised for depot workings. Columbia Road. Turning from Wallisdown Road into Kinson Road. At speed on Wallisdown Road. Marking the anticipated closure of the Richmond Hill routes, a tour using BUTs 234 and 246 was organised on the 11th of September 1966. In the event, the abandonment was postponed, but the tour still went ahead. Rebuilt 234 is seen at Columbia Road terminus. Action next on the emergency reverser at Bodorgan Road. This was sited at the top of Richmond Hill, so it could be used if the hill became dangerous due to ice and snow. Another little used reverser was situated in Red Hill Crescent, Moordown. This could be approached from either direction, the normal practice being to reverse carefully from the near side of the road. These manoeuvres were much loved by visiting enthusiasts. Yet more emergency wiring. This tightly angled loop at Horseshoe Common had been erected during the war, so that trolleys could be short-turned in case of war damage. When the side routes finally closed on the 25th of September, the system certainly lost much of its character. There would now be far fewer trolleys rounding the square. The triangle was retained for emergencies and for off-peak storage. The biggest loss was Richmond Hill. In 1958, 9 routes were involved. Now just 5 remained. Strict rules had always governed operation on the 1 in 8 grade. Descending drivers stopped at the summit in order to select the brake position on his controller, or reverser as it was known in Bournemouth. This would limit the speed to about 8 miles per hour. At the foot of the hill another stop was made so the forward position could be selected. On the ascent, should there be a complete brake and power failure, the driver placed the circuit breaker in the off position, which limited the run-back speed to about 2 miles per hour. Here a 31 purrs silently up the challenging incline. There now follow scenes of the side routes taken variously during the 1960s. Booms are pushed to full stretch as this inbound MF2B passes an obstruction close to the Bodorgan Road reverser. En route to Cemetery Junction. Just south of the busy intersection where the Lansdowne road wiring had been abandoned in 1963. Pulling out at the north end of Wimborne Road. Wimborne Road at Talbot Avenue. A P-car extra from Columbia Road runs round Winton Banks Loop in order to work back to Mallard Road Depot. Owing to the combined mass of frogs and crossings, this junction was known as the Umbrella. Wimborne Road north of Winton Banks. Ensbury Park Road served latterly by the 31 to Columbia Road. Columbia Road Terminal Loop. Note the frog installed for the planned extension to Bear Cross at Lawford Road, terminus of the 26. Castle Lane West. The triangular junction at Broadway, with a 29 working towards town. A conductor pulls the frog leading into Castle Lane East. From here, the lightly loaded 32s headed east for 2.5 miles to terminate latterly at Iford. Passing the entrance to Mallard Road. Approaching Cooper Dean roundabout. When this was built in 1963, it had swallowed up the attractive Stroughton Park Loop. The unrebuilt BUTs retaining the front stairs still had the covered space behind the driver's cab. Back at the Broadway, an inbound 32 turns into Charminster Road. Some 80 yards south was Luckham Road reverser terminus for the 28. This was the last reverser still in scheduled use. Journey time for the 3 miles to the square between 17 and 19 minutes. Clicking under the former junction with the 35. Sometime earlier, a short working 28 uses the loop at 5 ways. Even on the final day, the overhead line crew were active on Avenue Road.
If you could tell the passengers on the Sunbeams, then what would it do?
246 was booked for a final tour of the side routes by the Bournemouth Railway Club. Most of the threatened wiring, including the Banks Loop, was visited. The side routes had all worked out of Mallard Road. Now the wiring used by this trolley making for Broadway would no longer be required, although the wires towards Iford would be retained for depot journeys. The surviving BUTs were now all withdrawn, one of them, 246, eventually being purchased for preservation. After less than 8 years' service, the 10 earliest MF2Bs were also withdrawn, but being kept on site as a source for spares. Maximum daily requirement was for now just 19 trolleys. Although there was no deliberate policy to stint on maintenance during the next 2.5 years, the operating fleet did look increasingly down at heel. For example, there had been no repaint since June 1966. Reflecting changing circumstances, income was also derived from advertisements for the very first time in the spring of 1967. Many felt these disfigured the trolleys, whilst also obliterating the upper deck coat of arms. The overhead still demanded constant vigilance. This was one of the 2 elderly AEC buses acquired from Huddersfield in 1945 and subsequently fitted with a tower on a shortened chassis. In May 1967, 2 of the loops in Jarvis Place were combined and the frog set for the loop, so only vehicles passing straight through had to pull the frog handle. As part of a short-lived experimental traffic scheme introduced in October 1967, the tight turning circle at Fisherman's Walk, seen here, was cut off. Boscombe Depot, better known as Folkestone, was closed at 4 p.m. on the 31st of December 1967, all its surviving duties being transferred to Mallard Road. Until this time, no trolleys had been assigned to a specific depot. To enter the former tram depot, drivers edged cautiously off the main road. By the end, capacity was just 12 vehicles. To exit, they reversed out, watched by an inspector. A few months earlier, on the 30th of April, a Portsmouth trolleybus had popped into Folkestone. After the trolleys were scrapped, this building became an indoor market, but was demolished in the mid-90s. During the dying days of the undertaking, locals became less and less surprised by sudden splashes of strange colours, as an assortment of preserved foreign trolleys invaded the wires. 313 was a 1951 Birmingham-bodied BUT. Having successfully completed a trial outing on the 12th of March 1967, it participated in a full-scale enthusiast tour on the 30th of April. When it visited the pier, it evoked memories of its former glory days at Southsea and the Hard. The next visitor came from north of the border, and this was the first single-decker to run in the town since Bluebird migrated to South Shields during the war. This represented the final batch of trolleybuses ordered by Glasgow Corporation in 1958. This Leyland-built BUT with its 50-seater Birmingham body took to the Bournemouth wires on the 19th of May 1968. Londoners came for 2 tours in late June 1968. These were on board a classic pre-war 6-wheeler. 260 dated from 1935 and was an AC with Metro Camel body. Looking back over 30 years, enthusiasts still acknowledge manager Ian Cunningham's willingness to sanction these memorable tours. Reading Corporation also permitted some foreign operation. For example, on the 28th of July 1968, Bournemouth 202 undertook a highly successful tour. Back in Bournemouth, and Rotherham 44 saw action on a gloomy 8th of December. Interestingly, this Daimler had started life as a single-decker, but had been given this new row body in the mid-50s. On the 26th of January 1969, number 300 departed for Walsall to be transformed into a one-man bimodal diesel trolleybus with an engine on an enlarged rear platform. If successful, Walsall could have purchased all the redundant MF2Bs. However, when Walsall was amalgamated with the West Yorkshire PTE, this interesting scheme collapsed. Other foreign visitors at Bournemouth included Reading 174, a 1950 Sunbeam with a Park Royal body. It is seen here running in tandem with Preserve number 246. During the last 3 months, 212, now owned by the Reading Transport Society, returned home to undertake several well-attended tours. The remaining 5 routes operated over 12 miles of wiring, including the depot-only stretch from Iford to Mallard Road. The September 1968 timetable highlighted the forthcoming demise of the trolleybuses. The last types of tickets in use were set-right speed style. Trolleys working into town travelled either via Bath Road or St Peter's Road in order to reach the main loading point in Jarvis Place. Outbound, all 5 routes followed the same wiring, round the square and up the one-way winding grade to the Lansdowne. There now follows a selection of views following the geographical course of the remaining routes, taken variously during the 1960s. At Horseshoe Common, the inbound wiring diverged to reach the square via St Peter's Road. Outbound, all routes followed the same wiring to and round the Lansdowne. On the 2-mile straight run between the Lansdowne and Folkestone. At this busy junction outside Folkestone Station, the routes to Fisherman's Walk turned into Seabourn Road. The 20, supplemented by the Picar 24, continued along Christchurch Road, heading for the Bournemouth-Christchurch boundary at Iford Bridge. A Picar 24 at Iford Roundabout. (273) emerges from Jumpers Loop. From Jumpers, the 20s continued along Barrack Road, where they connected with the 21s at the spacious triangular junction at Stour Road. From here, the 2 trunk routes shared the wires to historic Christchurch, with its plethora of ancient buildings. Bargate's Corner near Christchurch Station. This signal, worked by a skate in the overhead, informed drivers approaching the blind corner leading to the turntable if it was already occupied. End of the line was in the former stable yard of the Dolphin Hotel, Church Street. The 33-year-old manually operated turntable, first used in June 1936, had cost just £380 to install. A similar device can still be found today on the Solingen system in Germany. Heading back to town at Stour Road Junction, with a 20 peeling off towards Jumpers. Whilst a 21 is on the path of the old tram route to Fisherman's Walk. The highlight was the bridge at Tuckton over the River Stour. The trolleybus overhead was supported by bracket gantries spanning the road. The traction poles were mounted in the deck of the bridge and supported by metal buttresses across the footpath to the railings. Tolls had remained in force until December 1942, with passengers paying an additional halfpenny and receiving an extra ticket. Trolleys were not allowed to pass on the bridge and speed was restricted to 10 miles an hour. Just south of the bridge was this new roundabout, constructed during 1963. It acted as the terminal point for the interworking through routing 22 and 23, which also changed numbers here. To reach Fisherman's Walk, the 23s headed first west along Cranley Road. A short working on the Carberry Avenue loop. the major junction at Fisherman's Walk. The 21s and 22s reach this same spot by way of Southbourne. The short working loop at Southbourne Crossroads. Outbound on Bellevue Road. Heading west along Southbourne Grove towards the busy junction at Fisherman's Walk. During the season, loadings here were especially heavy. Back once more at Folkestone, junction with Christchurch Road. As the end crept ever closer, the corporation were concentrating on plans for a decent funeral. Having been specially decorated by the workshop staff, 278 operated in normal service throughout the last trolleybus week, the 14th to the 19th of April 1969. The 352 assorted coloured bulbs have been borrowed from Blackpool. Throughout the final week, a special hourly service departed from the pier running out to Mallard Road, but picking up anywhere en route. The fare was 1 and 6 for adults and 9p for children. At the depot, visitors enjoyed a splendid exhibition devoted to the trolleys. In town, Bobby's department store had a special window display, and various references were made on both radio and television. The trolleybus was becoming something of a rare phenomenon. The Transport Department produced 4,000 copies of this special souvenir brochure. At just £0.50 a copy, sales were brisk. Normal services on the last day, Saturday, April the 19th, were well patronised. The grand finale started early on the Sunday morning with 3 of the preserve veterans out on enthusiast tours. between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., the public were able to make a last non-stop ride between the pier and Christchurch at a return fare of 3 shillings. These specials travelled out via the 20 and back via the 21. This vehicle is travelling from Mallard Road to participate in the grand final parade, which involved a total of 17 vehicles. Each displayed an identifying letter. At one point they were all lined up on Bath Hill, parked in alphabetical order, with chocks under their wheels on the steep section between the Royal Bath Hotel and the Pier Approach Baths. Special tickets were issued. In spring sunshine, large crowds watched as the procession was dispatched at intervals, so as not to overload the power supply, and speed was also restricted to 20 miles an hour. The off began at 2:20 p.m., the procession heading up Exeter Road towards the Winter Gardens and the square. Bringing up the rear would be the Mayor's party. They would be on board 301, the last ever new trolleybus to enter service in Britain. Included in the parade were several vintage trolleybuses, and in the background the crowds could hear the local Air Training Corps band playing a fitting medley of tunes. Last to leave were 5 of the modern Sunbeams, led by 278. The very last would be number 301. Rumbling over Tuckton Bridge for the last time. Only the last 5 vehicles in the procession went to Christchurch. Here they are seen heading back to Mallard Road and oblivion. At the depot, everyone except the special guests had to alight at the entrance. When introduced, the handsome MF2Bs had been the latest in trolleybus development. 30-foot long with automatic acceleration, telescopic shock absorbers, overload rubber buffers and anti-roll devices. Now no one wanted electric street traction. However, even after the closure, devotees were still able to ride a Bournemouth trolleybus on the public highway. For example, 246 transported enthusiasts on a tour of the crumbling Cardiff system on the 7th of September 1969. The very last chance came the following month, when 202 undertook 2 tours over the same system. Paradoxically, 202 was actually older than the Cardiff network, which only dated from 1942. What remains today? The Central Depot and Mallard Road are still in use. When Mallard Road opened in 1953, it had the largest span of pre-stressed concrete in the country and could provide column-free space for 99 vehicles. All told, Bournemouth operated a total of 176 trolleybuses. At its peak, the system had 107 miles of single-track wiring and 3,200 support poles, of which just a handful survive. Fortunately, through the good offices of the corporation and the dedication of enthusiasts, a number of trolleybuses do survive. Some are kept in store, whilst others are capable of operation. Some of the profit from the sale of this video will go towards keeping veteran open topper 202 in tip-top working order, so it can be enjoyed by future generations, not fortunate enough to have sampled the era of the silent, swift, environmentally friendly, fume-free trolleybus.